Welcome to Unboxing What Matters, a podcast brought to you by Deraz. In each episode, we will unpack the opinions, topics, and big ideas that are inspiring and changing our world today. I am your host, Mimi Nicklin. Welcome to the show. Hello and welcome back to Unboxing What Matters. Today we're here with Lucy Darbo, CEO of Together, a consultancy that focuses on people, purpose and culture in businesses worldwide. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Mimi. Great to be here. Really excited to be part of this.
Me too. And this discussion today, all around the employee revolution of 2023, whether it's coming or not. So let's kick off with a little bit of context. Let's start by talking about the state of our business world as we sit here today at the beginning of the year and what we're likely to see in the year ahead. I know you were recently featured by Fast Company with some predictions for the business world in 2023. Can you share a few of those predictions and what you think they mean for us?
Definitely. And a great way to kick off. I think, we all recognize that 2023 is going to be characterized by a lot of uncertainty. So I suppose we put it into 3 R's. Recession, rethinking, and reskilling are kind of the 3 core areas. Look, I'm going to say this. I'm a, workplace culture evangelist. But when it comes to the recession, number 1, invest in your culture. Genuinely, we've seen it. History tells us that what will differentiate, the survivors from the thrivers will be those organizations who are really able to protect and, their organization and protect the investments in people, purpose and culture. Because when they come out, from the bus, they'll be ready for the boom, and it really will be so important. Rethinking is a big one. There are so many aspects around people and culture that are still up for debate and still unanswered. And I think one of the biggest ones is still around flexibility, the office, what that means. So really encouraging leaders to rethink how they are tackling what their office workspace is for. We've seen leaders forcing people back to work, yet to see how effective that's going to be, but it's certainly creating a lot of media attention that organizations won't necessarily want. And it's not going anywhere. The reality is we've seen some great examples, even in the UAE, actually. We've obviously a lot of organizations have adopted the 4.5-day week, which the government set the standard for. And actually, the Minister for Government Development and the Future of Work, he gave some early data indications, and they're really good. And it's going to be challenging for everyone because they indicated that absenteeism was reduced by 55%. That's phenomenal. The amount of productivity that's coming from their presence, those that wouldn't have been there. And then I think finally reskilling, the digital economy is pushing us hard and fast. The AI developments are, overwhelming a lot of leaders and a lot of businesses. And I think reskilling our workforce to help them, because if leaders are uncertain, just imagine what your workforce are feeling like, worrying that I am no longer going to be necessary, what's going to be needed. And I think to reassure people, we just saw a piece of data, which I think is very, very reassuring, that in the last 3 months, job postings, 78% of them had soft skills as the predominant feature. So guys, don't worry. We are not obsolete anytime soon, but there is a need to double down on both, develop our digital capabilities whilst also recognizing that soft skills are not going anywhere fast.
Yeah. And how fantastic is that? As someone who completely believes in our need for human connection in the workplace, great to see, the data reflecting that and the importance, as you were saying there, of cultural investment. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because we are seeing, as you touched on there, a tumultuous, changeable landscape, right, in the year ahead. So how does that cultural investment really support leaders as they prepare for uncertainty? Can they, big question, can they become recession proof? And if so, how?
I mean, the reality is your workplace culture can't protect you from the recession or restructuring, but it can go an enormously long way to enable you to have a relatively stable period in an incredibly unstable time. And I mentioned it earlier, I think we take a lot of confidence by looking back. You know, there are times when things are really difficult that we can use history as a great source of comfort and insight. And we know, I mean, I think Amazon's a really good example in the dot-com bubble. You know, when everyone was looking to cut and save and huge layoffs, they really doubled down on their culture and their people. And although they didn't turn a profit until 2002, look at what that did for them. It set them well ahead of their competitors. They were in such a strong position to leverage that boom that followed. And we've seen, you know, go from strength to strength ever since. So it really is about recognizing that when things get really difficult, the most important thing is alignment and trust in an organization, that you've got a group of people who know where they're going, and that's absolutely the foundation of your culture. But furthermore, that you've got trust in that leadership, and that the information you're receiving and the way that they're stewarding the ship, you are in, you know, you're sailing with them, you're in with them, and that will ensure that you can come through it. So it really is incredibly important, and building the alignment and understanding amongst your workforce of where you're going and what you need to do will be transformational.
Super powerful words, and a great example from Amazon, because I think with so many of those tech brands, we as consumers actually learn about those brands in those years so often through the employee or employer brand before the product itself. So I think that's a brilliant example, you know, to set the scene for how culture also plays directly into your reputation and of course into growth and profit. Now, many of us are coming out of a year last year where we saw the Great Resignation take hold. For many leaders, they didn't know why, but they were seeing people, you know, leave the workforce without the thought that perhaps we would see in previous, you know, generations or times. Now we hear the phrase, the great re-engagement, right? So we're looking at bringing people back and really motivating them to overcome that difficult year. So when we look at organizations that are leading in this space, that are leading in the great re-engagement, what are we seeing? What can we learn about the best ways to drive employee engagement in these times? And why is that so pertinent today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, you know, we've talked about data a lot, but it's such a great proof point. And a recent statistic tells us that those with an engaged workforce outperform their competitors by over 200%. I mean, it's extraordinary. So it's almost befuddling to me that it isn't a priority already, because it's just so glaringly obvious that that's key to success. Where it really comes from, number one, and it is undervalued, and certainly in our region, I see it so often, is internal communications. That you could have organizations of 5,000 people with zero internal communications, strategy, resource planning. And it's probably the most undervalued component of engagement that we have certainly recognized as a glaring area for development. Because the reality is, if you have a large workforce, you know, it's very easy for a startup or a small scale business when there's only handfuls of you, and just day-to-day interactions ensures that you stay very much connected to, you know, the route of travel, where are we going as a business? But obviously with scale, and come to that, how your labor force is structured, if you have huge people who are out, you know, customer facing, don't have an email, how do you stay connected with them? Because that connection is what will be the glue that holds you together and builds alignment and keeps you all moving in the same direction. The great thing is there are loads of solutions. There's some incredible internal communications softwares, as simple as Workplace by Facebook, which, you know, there's debate whether how effective it is, but it's a good tool. There's a great new one called WorkVivo, which I love because the foundation of it is rooted in culture and values. So the whole structure of the platform is around recognition, rewarding for behaviors and actions that match the organizational values. And of course, the interface is like a social channel. So it's very familiar for multi-language, multi-dimensional workforces. But without having that two-way communication, it's very difficult, particularly with remote working or depending how your workforce are placed, to really keep connected and engaged. So that really should be a priority for 2023, for sure.
Such a great tip, because it's so easy, actually. Sometimes we forget how important those basics are, which is communication and consistent communication, talking to people, especially through times of change, which of course we're seeing a lot of. But let's talk about the title of this podcast today. We called it A Great Revolution. Why are we in a time of a great revolution between employees and employers? What does that mean? What does transparency mean as a leader of these times? And why is that so transformational in times of tension or complexity?
I mean, for me, it's so exciting to see this shift happen because, my purpose in life is to make great workplace culture the norm, not the exception, and not to have it as some novel benefit that only a select few get to enjoy. So seeing the power shift is phenomenal because it's enabling a more level playing field and a more equitable environment, which has only ever produced more productive and more successful outcomes. The transparency challenge I find fascinating because leaders are wrapped up in confliction, confusion, anxiety about this word transparency. And I would really push the question back to them and ask them, how much in the last 10 or 15 years has your organization changed in terms of your product, in terms of your service, in terms of your supply chain, in terms of the innovations? And they have generally transformed. If you use something as simple as automotive and look at a Mini and take a Mini 15 years ago, I mean, I love Minis, they're very distinctive and probably very British. A Mini 15 years ago and a Mini today don't even look the same.
Yeah.
Their fuel consumption is different. The design, the features, everything about it, the cost has all changed. If you flip that and we look at ourselves, how much have we changed as leaders? We're running organizations that are transforming all the time, and yet we don't recognize the need that we need to evolve, innovate, and transform ourselves. And I think if we could recognize that, if leaders around the world could recognize the importance of them moving with the change that their own organizations have done, then it would be a much easier process to help upskill, because we need to be investing in ourselves to be better leaders, to move with the times. So that transparency piece is connected, in my view, very much to that leadership evolution. And there is this sense that back in the day, we never said anything. So we will stick to that. Reality is it doesn't work anymore. It's also, unfortunately, I think people's perception of transparency is very skewed. Transparency doesn't mean, in a leadership perspective, tell me everything. It means say as much as you can, be fair to those around you, and take them on the journey with you. And that's really, transparency means we're not in a position to tell you, but what we can tell you is this. That doesn't mean you're opening up everything and making yourself vulnerable, and it means that you're meeting your workforce halfway, and it's incredibly important.
I think on that last point, we could talk a little bit more about that, because as you touched on there, it can be quite scary, quite intimidating, to look at this shift. I'm a CEO, perhaps I have 25 or 30 years experience in my business, likely that we're talking about an Asian context here. And now I'm hearing that I need to shift. I need to shift after 15 years of consistency. I need to be more transparent with my staff. We know that for many CEOs, that is quite intimidating. They have this fear of losing control, this discomfort with changing the structure. So what advice do you have for these leaders that have, let's say, 25, 30 years experience? They're very much in the habit of their leadership style, and now are seeing the employee landscape change so drastically. What words of advice would you have for them?
The really single biggest change that can happen is actually to build your own self-awareness. Because the only way for us to recognize why these things are making us feel so anxious, because change is difficult. One of the things very undervalued is how hard it is for people to change. And when we consider what happens in an organization when you go through a massive period of change or transition, there are entire teams dedicated to that transformation process. So the same should be said for an individual, right? If we were to look at our own team and see that there were skills that required development or areas that could be, increased and sort of adapted, we would support them with the necessary tools and the necessary interventions to help them progress that next level. And the same is for a CEO. What's challenging is it tends to be quite lonely. You're in a fairly isolated position. You are not sure who to trust, maybe in your C-suite. You've got many stakeholders and a board breathing down your neck. And that's really where the self-awareness becomes the powerful tool. Because if you can understand more about yourself, what are your innate strengths? What are you innately really, really good at? And then really try and be objective about the areas that could do with some development. Then you're in a position to go, maybe communication isn't my skill. That's maybe what is making me hesitant about it, because historically I've never had to do it. It hasn't been a requirement. And therefore, how can I build the skills and capability to be better at it? And there's so many different ways you can do that, right? Coaching is an incredible support. Certainly executive coaching for C-suite can be incredibly powerful and incredibly beneficial. There's also a lot of assessments you can do for yourself. Gallup Strengths do one, Myers-Briggs. There's a lot of these available resources where you can further understand where you sit. And if you're not the person to do that, then potentially who in your team could be someone who can then be the voice for you. There is always going to be a solution. The key is how to get the message out there and be confident to do that. And as you said, losing control, it does come back to the fact you are more likely to have control over an organization and a workforce if everyone is aligned and moving in the same direction. The lack of control actually comes from microcultures, lack of direction, and people going off into totally different areas. And that's actually the definition of a loss of control. So sometimes I think, leaders worry that because they've got people going in different directions, they should not do more communication. And in fact, that's when you need to double down to bring everyone back. And to your point earlier, consistency. Even if it's something as small as a regular town hall, just that one thing, and you did that, and you did it every quarter for a year, and then did a pulse check on your organization before and a year later, I would stake a significant amount of dollars. You would start to see higher engagement, improved trust, and possibly more productivity.
Fantastic. So actually a lot of that's about reframing. What you were saying there at the end around this perception of loss of control is actually going to increase control, and in so doing impact all of these things, motivation, tenure, loyalty, focus of your workforce. So if that's the case, really what we're saying in this day and age is that leaders, if they ignore this advice, really they're doing so at their own peril, because the world has already changed, the workforce is ready and waiting. And if you don't do it, the next CEO within one of your competition probably will. So let's talk about KPMG in the Middle East, because I know you know this story, who recently hit the news in the Financial Times. So on the other side of the world, for remaining to lead in that very command and control era. They didn't create the shift that you're talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about the case and what your key takeaways were that perhaps other regional leaders could learn from?
Definitely. I mean, it is fascinating because, to your point, it's a UAE story that is running in the Financial Times regularly. So back in September, it came to light that the management teams at KPMG regionally in the Middle East had gone above their CEO to HQ to report around leadership, around nepotism, around toxic culture, around business decisions. And there was essentially, an employee revolt against this particular leader. What then followed, of course, within 4 weeks, another full page in the Financial Times, and the CEO has exited. But honestly, even more troubling is that a month later, the KPMG is reported to not be able to run audits in Abu Dhabi, and the government's taken a call. So it started as, what some leaders might go disgruntled employees, complaining about the CEO, and actually has resulted in a full leadership change and a direct business impact of millions of dollars. So what it tells us is actually the shift in control. And coincidentally, I know this maybe is the Financial Times. They're very specific on this topic at the moment. Just today, it was announced that in Spain, the big four, KPMG, EY, PwC, and of course I've gone blank now on the fourth, they had reportedly gone to the government to complain about working hours and it being abusive. And the government sent inspectors. So KPMG was the company that the complaint came from. The inspectors went into all of the big four in Spain to understand what was really happening in those organizations. So what we have to recognize is that your reputation as an organization is at the mercy of your people. And that's where the biggest shift has changed. And when we look at culture, reputation is a huge contributor, because what your people are saying about you, what Glassdoor is saying about you, what your peers are saying about you, is a huge contributing factor into your success or real challenges when it comes to the leadership landscape. So take heed, leaders, because no longer is it something that will stay inside the walls of your business. It will soon be out into the world and the public, and that can be incredibly damaging.
What I think is fascinating about that is, for a long time, I think leaders would put those types of communications down to like social media, and they'd be like, oh, it's just, it's on Facebook or it's on Instagram, or, it's just social media. But as you're saying, what's happening now is this is reaching to political parties, to the government, to the Financial Times on the other side of the world. Organizations are being, mandated not to work in entire states or countries because of this. So the world is listening, right? And responding. The idea that they're going to send inspectors in to reflect on these complaints marks, a huge shift, right, from a business culture and a sort of a social responsibility point of view. Elon Musk, don't know if he's had any inspectors recently, but he probably should have. He's been at the center of so much discussion in recent months. Some people are cheering him on, some are pulling him down. Where do you stand, Lucy, on his approach to culture and employee engagement, and why do you feel that way?
To your point, it's incredibly controversial and divisive. And I think, CEOs around the world were probably cheering him on at certain points, I'm sure. And some were absolutely appalled. It almost, to me, that's the side point. I think when it comes to workplace culture, what he is absolutely crystal clear. Yeah. And actually, that is what a distinctive culture is. Be absolutely explicit and articulate very clearly what your culture is, what kind of behaviors and people will fit and the behaviors and actions that are expected. Yeah. That clarity, I think he has done, I think everyone would agree, is crystal.
Pretty clear.
He has also, and I think that's the really key point about culture, he's put the power back to the people to buy in or step out. And the reality is your culture should be as distinctive as your DNA, utterly unique, very specifically about you, and actually very much about driving your strategy. Where is it you want the organization to go? And how will the kind of culture that you cultivate support the behaviors and actions that will get you there? For him, he believes that's the way. Do I want to work there? Of course, thank you. That's not for me, but it's also not my place to tell, we're about helping organizations build a culture that will support them to their journey. Obviously, with incredibly important, ethical and moral compass to that. But in the end, the culture that's right for that leader in that business will never be right for everybody.
Yeah.
And the fact that it is like, opt in or opt out, it's up to you. Has he done it the right way? Honestly, and I know I'm like a broken record, he didn't communicate. And I really feel like that was actually the biggest issue. It's not what he did, it's how he did it.
Wow.
And there's a distinct difference between those two. People have to restructure. Did he make the right decisions? You have to take drastic action if you're losing significant amounts of revenue. That is the responsible leadership act. Where you can do it very differently is advocate for your employees. Look at what even Meta is doing now. I mean, there's so many layoffs in the tech world, but Mark Zuckerberg's committing to 3 months career advisory. And how can we support our employee base during, decisions that have been taken out of their control? How can we advocate? Kareem did it, here in the UAE. 3 years ago when they knew they were going to have to lay off. So they did an open letter asking the government for help because they knew that they didn't want, that it was coming, and they were trying to do everything in their power to avoid, because they recognized the impact that would have on their drivers. So really, like everything, it's not always what you do, it's how you do it. And that's never more important when you're a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that last point is so valuable, because often when you look at the conversation we've had today as well, which is CEOs need to change, there's lots of shifting out there, there's generational gaps, there's employee expectations changing. But fundamentally, I take away two things from what you said. One is, the change has already happened. So, you've got to keep up. And the other is, of course, that making this shift is directly impacting, business, future, stability, profit, all of these pieces. So it's not just about, your staff, which of course is critically important, but it's about, future-proofing your business, which is exactly where we started today, right? Which is 2023 is looking to be another complex year, may or may not, but looking likely we're heading for a recession. These shifts in some of the things you've spoken about today, Lucy, self-awareness, changing with your people, communicating with your people, are critical to, potentially making it through the year, as you said earlier, thriving through the year rather than just surviving. So I want to end just to talk a little bit about you. You've touched on it today. Tell us a little bit more about your business, about Together as a consultancy. What's your vision for the next 3 to 5 years across the region? And why do you think that really matters to this business landscape that we're working in?
Well, the purpose is, I mentioned it earlier, to make a great workplace culture the norm, not the exception. And I think the most important piece there is, what is a great workplace culture? And it isn't ping pong tables and beanbags and yoga. Those could be, depending on your culture. But I think that's and that's what we've seen recognized in the last 18 months by stakeholders, by boards, and by C-suite, that actually it makes business sense. And I'm so excited to see what the next 18 months to 2 years, because it has become a priority. And that is just so exciting, not just as a business, but really, because it's about impacting the workforce. And for every organization that takes on the challenge of transforming their culture, there are hundreds or thousands of people that are impacted directly by that change. And our ambition is for that to always be a positive change, because when you build alignment and you build clarity and you communicate and you engage and you recognize your workforce, that feeling of seeing a group of people moving in one direction and the power and force that comes with that is phenomenal. And we've seen that with some incredible clients so far in the last year, and what looks to be an incredibly busy year ahead. And really, internal comms is the big takeaway of all the work that we're doing. That's the area that definitely, outside of culture transformation, that needs the most attention. And we're happy to see that people are recognizing that, and organizations are, looking to do more. I think in 5 years, what the big dream would be, and I think that would show how committed the world is that we start seeing a CCO in the C-suite, and that would be the Chief Culture Officer, and legitimately about culture, not HR with a different name, actually someone who is absolutely intrinsic to ensuring that the organization thrives and that the culture thrives with it. That would make me the happiest person on the planet, that's for sure.
How likely do you think it is? How close are we to it?
Do you know what? I really feel like it's possible. And oddly, I feel like the UAE and the Middle East could be the region to set the standard. I think we have track record for recognizing the sheer power that happiness, that engagement, that productivity, has. And something like a chief culture officer is something I imagine happening certainly in the UAE government, probably as a starter. It will take time, like everything. I'm an optimist. I have to be. And lucky it's innate. But I do feel that, 5 years, I'm confident.
Phenomenal positivity to end the show. So Lucy Darboe, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to reach out for you, where can they find you, Lucy?
They can visit us on www.together.inc or Together at Work on social channels and LinkedIn.
Wonderful. So go and check out Lucy and all the work that they're doing it together to change culture across the Middle East and Asia, and keep up to date with the trends, because there is a lot of thought leadership coming out of the Together business. So thank you so much for joining us today. I've been here with Lucy Darboe from Together, talking about the great revolution between employees and employers in the year ahead. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Unboxing What Matters. Subscribe and follow us on social media to stay on top of all that's to come in the season ahead.